My name is Richard Malone. I'm an artist and a designer from Wexford in Ireland, and this is the Minded podcast.
Richard, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm a little bit cold, but other than that, I'm fine.
You know what I love? What you just said. You introducing yourself, and you said it: artist and designer. Is that the
Mhm.
order that you see yourself? An artist first.
Yeah, I think so. The design part came a little bit later, but the kind of intention that I try to keep when I'm making work is definitely an artist. It's less kind of formulaic or prescriptive. And for me, it's two very different sides of my brain, even though they come from the same place, but they are separate somehow.
Huh? Can you tell me more about that? How is that separate?
Yeah, I think that for me, like a lot of the design I do, whether that's fashion or garments, which are kind of, or chairs or textiles for the home or something, they're always really defined by a function. And art sometimes is quite different in that it doesn't have a functionality at the end. Like sometimes it does, but with design, you're kind of working towards someone living in it or how long it's going to last, or someone, for me, I started making clothes as a made to order business, and it was really like how someone wanted to feel or a shape they wanted or a silhouette. So it's kind of more of a conversation, and the artwork is more kind of personal and insular and separate, I suppose.
Do they follow kind of the same line in terms of inspiration for you? Or what I mean by that is that do you need any specific point of view before you express it? Is that it's a material that you want to explore, or is that a concept that you're interested in? And that's how you find yourself interested before you're pursuing and go a little bit deeper. How that process works for you, and if it's the same for both for the artist side and also for the designer side.
I think they're motivated and created from the same place. Like, I think that I wouldn't have had an awful lot of access to kind of culture and museums. I'm from a rural town in Ireland, and that's not really something that I grew up with. So anything creative or any kind of output like that, I had to rely on myself and my imagination. So even in the studio, if I was working on something like a design collaboration or a design for someone or a chair or something, I don't have like mood boards and references, and I don't like I've never set those boundaries of kind of judgment for myself, which I think is a type of world we're in now, where it's like people are kind of getting congratulated for the reference as opposed to just for the work. So I think the way that I make work is kind of not judged in that same way, because it's always kind of towing a different line or something. It's kind of between worlds of craft and art or design, and like people who in sculpture shows don't really often know what to do with fabric or stitch, and it certainly hasn't been given the space kind of conceptually or like in regards to other art making forms, which also is really exciting for me. That idea of newness really motivates, I think, all artists in the studio, whether it's like newness within your own language or like discovery. And I think that's probably what I'm most motivated by. It's like a sense of play, and not being kind of tainted by the kind of consumerism that surrounds it. It's always been kind of my try to like run away from it, I think.
You said something that kind of got me interested, and it's about people getting congratulations by the references they've been using. So clearly you're fully aware of that during the process. Do you try to stay away from those references? What I mean by that, if you're noticing as you're creating something new, a new collection, an exhibition, and you're seeing that you're getting too close towards something that already has a reference, you pull back?
Yeah, only if I know about it. Like that's the thing. I think people think that you automatically have this like language of everyone else who's making in the world, which I don't. And if ever I had to use a reference, it would be to communicate or explain to someone else what I mean. Which is in the studio. If it was like a fashion situation, it's if I'm working with a stylist who I'd always work with on fashion shows, it's to be like, this is what I mean, because I can't explain it. And I don't often have the language actually, because I make everything. Like I don't direct jobs to people. And that idea of like, I went through kind of being working in very rural spaces and in like different courses. And then I went to St. Martin's in London, which felt a bit like the X Factor, you know, it was very like serious, which is great because it felt like I was getting an education that was quite hard to get, you know? And I think like coming out of that, there's such a turnover of young designers and young artists, and like a style is often what floats someone to the top to getting talked about. But then when that style shifts, some people get left. And I've always tried to avoid being too trendy or stylish. Like it's just not in me to do that. So I've always avoided it like the plague. And that's just the way I work. Like that's what I find quite dangerous. If I start towing that line where it suddenly looks like you're part of a family of design or a family of artists, then it gets a bit challenging. I've always tried to be just in my own lane. And if I have the space to work, I'm very happy with that, you know?
Do you feel because your upbringing, how you were in a rural area, once you made it to London, it was easy for you to see the distinctive line? Because sometimes those lines can be blurry in industry. People just figured out it's just how it is. It is what it is. That's how it's always been. But because for you came from such a different background, it was very black and white and easier for you to distinct where to step.
I think when I came to London, especially, everything is so new to me. And I mean down to how people like interact and mannerisms and like that idea of like very light touch nepotism where people like I'm surrounded still by amazing designers in London, but who all grew up in London. And they don't talk about it like this. It's an enormously privileged place to grow up because you have access to these things. And it was only when I kind of got to art school, I understood like this kind of class structure that I was quite far outside of it. And a lot of people were kind of born into it through the schools they went to or their parents' professions, access to doing internships, homes to live in when they're doing internships and have careers afterwards. So it was very overwhelming, actually. It was very like, this whole world exists and I'm not really a part of it. But also when I got to St. Martin's, they were always like, that's your thing. Like you have this really unique thing that's really hard to explain. And it's a material visual language that I think endlessly feeds me because I work a lot in Ireland and from Ireland, kind of half and half actually now, if not more in Ireland. And it's like, it's always there and it stayed the same. And that's really important to me, to be grounded in it and not get lost in kind of what's happened in my career. Because I think it's very easy for that stuff to really distract you. So like if I've won an award or I've won something, I like literally hide the award and I'll never look at it again. And I'll never read a review. And I'm that kind of person. I like don't want to be distracted. So I think when I was younger, it was very easy to be like, oh, this is shit for me because I haven't the access to like money or the language to describe what I'm trying to talk about in a crit or a tutorial or something. But it also meant that I had a different language and I had to find a different way in. And that was always going to be quite different. So now when I'm faced with a road or something where people don't know whether it's like sculpture or fashion or, you know, I'm quite anti-categorization. So I think I can rely on my younger self for that because that person kind of moved through it somehow.
I read in one of your previous interviews, you said that I don't think fashion knows what to do with me. Do you think that's still the case?
That's always been the case. Like, it's so funny because I felt really like embraced when I was in art school because I was doing a lot of performance. Like that's kind of, I think, what got me in. I was really interested in like garments and relics and memory and like just like how gender and even queerness are related to these things, but it's never spoken about in that way. And I was really like allowed to run riot. And then when final year comes around, you really have to make clothes. So that's when I was really seriously, I think, thinking about collections and clothes. But that felt very different to like who I am and what I actually like to do in the studio. And I think fashion never had a clue what to do with me. And I never had the clue what to do with it because having worked in like enormous brands and then graduating from a school like that and going through all those different sponsorships and showing at London Fashion Week and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I still don't know what to do with it, but I was always kind of arguing against it. And I was always getting like in trouble sometimes for saying things that I shouldn't say, or, you know, understand, like even just like how people who are enormously wealthy are giving the same amount of bursary as someone who has no money and is an immigrant here. Like that's not fair in my eyes, and someone needs to do something about it. And to me, that's just like stating the obvious. So there's all of these complex things that I was observing, and I don't think they knew where to put me. And like even when I was in the prizes or won the prizes, there were certain judges at like the LVMH prize that I really didn't think were qualified to judge my work. And I was very vocal about that. And I think that was also a problem, because they're like, you know, influencers, not even that, because that can be a career in a very like investigative field, but more like people who are famous for being famous were on the judging panel. And I just thought that's really unacceptable. I still think that. And I think skill and craft and all of those things need to be protected. It can't just be commerce. So yeah, I quite like that it didn't know what to do with me, because then I was able to find whatever my own way is. Like I still think I'm in the middle of it, so I don't know what's going on half the time. It's just like it's a trial and error that I really enjoy.
You'll be able to embrace the journey for whatever it is.
Yeah.
I find it quite courageous as well for a young designer to be so vocal in an industry that sometimes is quickly to move on. As you mentioned earlier, things happen so fast. Now, you mentioned before, where you come from rural, that you weren't exposed to that language. I'm sure at one point in your teenage, you couldn't wait to get out and explore the world and being able to be in those places and be in those rooms. And now that you had a chance to experience, you kind of realize that perhaps there's a little bit further things that we don't discuss publicly. And now you find yourself doing back and forth, kind of going back to home more often than not, because that's where you thrive. Were you surprised that when you started at St. Martin's that you were embraced the way you were, or you thought they would kind of try to mold you to be what a fashion designer is supposed to look like, supposed to work?
I don't think they would have been able to. Like it was I felt when I was at art school, it was really, really weighted. And it wasn't without pressure. Like I didn't have that thing where you move to a city and you're like, you get to go out and get pissed all the time and have a fun time. Like I had to really work. Like I had to work several jobs to get through St. Martin's. I was working in like a pub. I was working in an Italian deli. I was doing drawings for prints for people. I was an extra in adverts for a minute. Like anything, like I didn't care. But it was really expensive. Like for me and my family, I think as well, it was like a really expensive, luxurious endeavor. So it didn't feel like it was without this enormous baggage of kind of like making it work, getting a job. And it's not like it's so different to be motivated by money as opposed to being motivated by security. You know, and I think people don't often discuss that side of it. Like I'm not from the UK at all. I hadn't got family here to live with. So you're very like independent from a really young age. So I think in a sense at St. Martin's, they really embraced me, but I was already kind of like running and trying to make this thing work or happen, even though I didn't know what trajectory that might take or what would be available for me. And it all looks really impressive on paper when you look at like awards and collections and prizes and exhibitions, but people don't see that like before that award or before that award, like someone's really struggling. You know, like it might not work if I didn't get that prize. There's a world where it hadn't worked out, you know? And even the year that I went to St. Martin's, the fees were £3,000 at the time. And that's as much as the credit union would loan me to go to university. Like I think it was like €3,000 to get the fees and all that sort of stuff. And I remember like if I'd gone the next year, the fees had gone up to £9,000. So that's someone maybe in my position just not being able to go. And I think that's scares the shit out of me, because I'm like, if I was a year later going, I probably wouldn't be able to go or make it work. So it's all of these things that makes it feel not so like as fun as it was also like balancing that with like the pressure of staying there and keeping it up.
Wow. No, I think the interesting thing, as you mentioned, is the difference between social levels as well. As you mentioned, if you don't have the means, it's such an uphill battle.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an exception to the rule here and there that people have been managed to, to be part of their world without going to the traditional path. But again, it's 1 in a million. So a lot of conversation about. I think there's a lot of conversation about diversity in the world right now in fashion, but also not only ethical diversity, but also social diversity as well. It's something we don't speak very often.
It's really hard with the way the world is structured now. Everything is kind of categorized and visualized. A lot of like people have identity markers in their brain, and things like class, queerness, even. And gender identity, they can be invisible things. So how do you describe them, or like how do you even begin to talk to them? And most corporations, and like I mean, like even the sponsorship bodies, they don't want to talk about those things because there isn't a value they can kind of extract from it, I think, and the visual language sometimes of queerness or class becomes very valuable because people can buy it, feel like they're a part of it. And I've always tried within my work to not fetishize that imagery, I suppose, and to kind of keep it, give myself a license to be like creative and original and kind of occupy that space, whether that's in an exhibition or with the work I'm doing, to be conceptual, I suppose, to have ideas attached to it that are real and moving.
I can't not help myself because we have talked a little bit about your upbringing and everything else. What are some of those memories that you have growing up? Some of those treasure moments that you think that you hold with you in those difficult days that you don't know how things are going to go through. You kind of rewind, look back and find, okay, we're going to be okay.
I think like humor is something that I grew up quite like surrounded by. And also, I think I had in Ireland, like, especially in like working class Ireland, it's very gendered, but in my experience, women kind of ran it. So I think that idea of misogyny is kind of so far from the environments I grew up in a way, because women were always kind of in control. And my grandmother next door to us, when we were building our house, we lived with her and stuff. And my parents had a caravan in her garden when they were building all this. So we were surrounded by her, and she was very independent until she died. Like my dad's dad died very young, and then she was on her own and just like had all these hobbies and friends. And that's kind of something that became really aspirational to me, is to like be independent. And like, she was someone who never got the opportunities that I got, like through education or through, she stopped being educated, I believe when she was like 8 or 9, and that was very common back then, but still had this hunger for learning. And so I understand there's different ways to learn and still be really intelligent and engaged. And that kind of learning, I think, was really empathetic. And she also often told me she told me about an artist and designer called Eileen Gray, who was from Wexford. And storytelling is a really important part of the Irish language, but also like now how we interact. And I think she told me about that. Now that she's gone, I understand it's like to see myself as having a creative job like that, maybe. And Eileen Gray had this, she was very privileged, don't get me wrong. She was like from a Protestant family, lived in a big house, all of that. But my grandmother always left that out. She always was like, it's just this person from Wexford who did it. So that became somehow possible for me to imagine myself doing it. And also the environments that I grew up in, like when our house was being built, it's a very small house, but like my dad was building it, and I remember we were allowed to play on the site, things like that. And I worked with my dad, who's a painter and decorator, on building sites at summers, like during summers. And so there's this very like male material language And my granddad and my dad as well used to work in factories. There was a lot of factories in Wexford. And then my grandmother's environment was very sort of materially different. There was lots of like quilting and cross stitching and drawing and like making cards for people and mending clothes. So even some of my first understandings of making art were textiles, or of making garments were making garments for someone or repairing them for someone. You know, it was nothing was thrown away. Everything was kind of preserved. So, and as someone who doesn't really feel particularly gendered, like somewhere in the middle, I think fairly, like to see these kind of performances of gender, like on building sites or male environments, or like in this female environment next door that was very kind of open and everything got discussed around the kitchen table, it gave me a lot of like observation. You know, I found it really enriching to like sit back and watch and observe this. And because we had nothing to do, you know, so it was like you had to imagine things to do. And I remember like even sitting on outside our house, like counting how many cars went past, and that kind of like that kind of boredom actually really informs like my capacity for boredom. And like daydream is really important to me. I was always in trouble at school for doing that and for chatting, and like, so it's all of these things. And it's also the place, like it felt very rural when we first moved out of town to there, because the bridge that connects us to the town side of the river was taken down. So suddenly we couldn't access town. You had to go around the river. And that the bridge was actually dumped in the like fields behind my house, directly behind it. So we were playing on this, what looked like a movie set. You know, it's an enormous bridge, and it was just smashed up, and we could play on it. And we had a Springer Spaniel called Patch, who I spent a lot of time with, and I would just be out there in that field. So those things, it's like a real sense of kind of freedom. And one of the things that I notice now when I'm doing a big project is I don't care like the money involved or the people involved, or like it's really about trust. Like it won't work unless there's trust there. And I feel like I had that when I was younger. And I feel like I had that at St. Martin's. And I feel like some of the projects that have really worked for me since graduating, I've really had someone there who just trusts me and like builds a little wall around me and is like, Richard's going to do their job now, and leave them alone, leave them in the corner, you know?
How beautiful. Thanks for picturing that image for us. And it's fascinating. I think what you just said is a luxury that a lot of these generations will not have the opportunity to enjoy that moment, just to be bored and just to look around and figure out what to do next. I think we're about the same age. I think I'm also an immigrant from Brazil originally, and I experienced a lot of that growing up. It was the best memories I have as well.
Yeah,
we're just not knowing what to do, running around, causing trouble, not knowing what. No, just going back home to eat when you're hungry, and that's about it.
Yeah,
I like what you said about trust. And I want to kind of dive a little bit into that. How do you gauge that in terms of when you have a conversation about a project, or, you know, anything else that you would be collaborating in some capacity? How do you have those conversations with someone and realize that they can trust you, but you also can trust on them?
I think it's like there's usually immediate connections or like reasoning for a project happening. If it's been like, there's been brands that are very big who wanted to collaborate, but certain questions couldn't be answered. And I think a lot of my work, whether it's like sculpture, visual art, or video, or fashion and textiles, I think of it as like leaving a question in the space and not like answering things. So I think like it's being allowed to create like quite freely, being allowed to make things quite freely. And for me, that's really physical, like, because I don't sketch fashion and I don't sketch design things. I just like go and make them. So there's this trust that happens between me cutting into a fabric, or me welding steel, or me building something out of wood, and then, you know, covering it and stitching it, and like just having that trust to know. And I think it's also when people put a really significant time pressure on things, or when they ask too many questions. You know, you have to be allowed to fail continuously within every process when you're delivering something. And a good one that we did actually was, I worked with Mulberry. That's a British brand, like a leather goods brand. And
yes,
just talking about like how I like to make work and make things. And then they showed me what they were already doing in terms of sustainability, which was amazing. So it felt like a conversation, and the whole project was like, I got to kind of remake their iconic bag, like really take it apart and remake it and photograph these kind of flat lays just as ideas. And that became like one part of the project. And then I got to build these big sets, and we got to do a show and photograph people who were involved with me, like friends of me or who I've worked with, in clothes that they already own. So it was a different kind of campaign because we weren't selling the things people were wearing. You know, like a lot of people already own the things in them. So I think it's when you have someone who is on your side and just like can tell, I don't know, it's something like of understanding like what your role is and what they want you to be. Because I'm not like, the idea of being a creative director has always frightened me. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't want to be a filter for other ideas or to make other people's ideas palatable for now. Like, that's never been my intention. So it's like any project where I'm allowed to really make and engage with like archives and things and have a process of learning, then I'm really excited by. But trust is a tricky one to come by. And also like the people who have been around me, whose opinions I really trust, are pretty much all still there, you know? And I think that's quite telling.
yes, of course. And I think also an important part of trust is trust yourself.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to go next. Exactly. First of all, at what age did you realize, not that this is something that you want to pursue, but perhaps you have something to say? Perhaps I'm quite good at what I do. Was that a moment, that time that kind of was reassuring for you?
Was it? I don't know. Like, I think it came relatively recently, actually. Like, I think it came like when I was like 27 or 28. Like, there was been moments where I'm like when I got into St. Martin's, I had to apply twice to get in. And I remember each time, like, I would be devastated if I didn't get in. The first time I didn't get in, quite obviously, because I wasn't using the tools that I had. I was trying to use someone else's tools. And that's a real problem for creative people. So when I went the second time, I went with all of these sketches and drawings and quite random, like performances and things. Like, it was quite a mad portfolio. And I'm also quite surprised, because sometimes I lecture there now, and I'm quite surprised that I had the balls to do that. I don't know where that came from. And I don't know, like I'm so in it with the work, I tend not to realize when something really big is happening, because I'm not looking at it from the outside. I'm in the middle of it going, like, what's happening to me? Like, well, how's this going on? But I also have a really real deadline in front of me that I need to get the work done, and I need to deliver this. I need to get welding, or I need to get stitching. So it's only like years later that I can be like, what the fuck's been going on in my life? You know, how's this happened? And it always feels like the stakes are higher than I'd ever like them to be. You know, like it was, and that was, I remember when me and my boyfriend were living in not a very nice studio. Like, there are these studios that you like sleep in the bed above where you make the work. And he's an artist too. He's an amazing painter and sculptor, actually. He studied sculpture, but just like, we were working in this environment, there was like cats like shitting in the shower, and there was like, it was horrible. And then the first kind of studio visit that was booked in was the MoMA in New York. And they emailed me to come for a studio visit, and we're talking about like my work in a very important way that I hadn't ever thought about or realized. So, and I remember saying it to Tom and being like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't know if we want them to come here and see the reality of like what my life is like. But they came, and they became the first kind of institution to like buy my work and support it. And that's been a really that was such a valuable conversation to me, because it made me realize that what I was making, like, I don't always have the language or a conceptual framework, but it was hitting something in them that meant it was important. And there was these like essays and conversations that were happening that I wasn't aware of, that were presented to me. And I thought they were amazing. And I was commissioned to make work. And yeah, it's like very mad that was the first, the first one. And that person again was Paolo Antonelli at the MoMA, was the first person to really like give me trust in an institutional capacity and be like, do what you want. And equally, like last year, I was on a residency on a farm in Wexford, where I'm from, a different part of Wexford from where I'm from, just like going about my business. And then I get a call from David Remfry, who's an amazing, David Remfry, Ore, I should say, who's an amazing artist, who just rang me and was like, do you want to do the Central Hall at the Royal Academy? And I was a bit like, what is happening? Like, I don't know. And, you know, it was the end of February, and it was like, oh, it needs to be installed at the beginning of May. And it's this huge, you know, space in London, and it's very public facing project. And it just feels like all of these things are very public facing, or like the Met this year as well. Like, I didn't know that was going to be such a big thing. But also an example of where I had complete trust. And like at the Royal Academy, David was very much like, we're going to get you in and you're going to make the thing. And there's going to be like a tiny barrier around you, and you just have a week to get the work in. And that felt like I was in art school again, which was amazing. They just like, I was going around in the cherry picker, putting this stuff up, and it was complete trust, even though it was going to be like the main thing in a week's time. And then for the Met, Andrew Bolton, who works as like the chief curator, called me in 2019 about, I think, purchasing work or something, and it didn't work out because of COVID. And then last year called me, and we were speaking about the work and how I would make it. And I was like, if you really want work, you should like commission it, because I don't make a lot of work, and it's not lying around. Like, I don't make multiples of things usually. There's usually only one. So they commissioned 3 pieces, and it took me like 3 months or something to make them in the studio. But that's how I like to work. So that kind of trust, they didn't know what they were going to look like, you know, and in any of those instances, like I could have completely failed, and they just like, for some reason, like trusted me. And that makes complete difference, because you feel like you kind of, not that you owe them something, but you feel like it's such a privilege to be trusted in that way, especially with something that doesn't exist yet. And that is quite high stakes. But again, like, I don't realize those things are happening because I'm too busy making the work. So it's only when we got to New York and was like the Met, and, you know, Fifth Avenue is closed down, and you're like, oh, this is a really big thing to some people. But to me, it's just me making the work, you know. So it feels like there's different worlds that it all lives in, and I'm only in the one where I make it, you know.
I had someone on the show that told me before, the artist lives for opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting concept to think about, because a lot of people would jump in any opportunity given to them. But it seems like you also have the confidence to realize it and make sure that you can deliver it in a level that you're happy with and you're proud of as well, because that's a big part as well. You know, as you mentioned, there's trust on you, but there's also an expectation that you're going to deliver it.
Yeah, and I need to like make that part of my brain quiet with the expectation part, because if you put too much pressure on that, it becomes something else. And even like with the towards the end of me finishing the thing for the Royal Academy last year, they were like, oh, it's going to be on the poster, like everywhere in London. It was kind of mortifying, but no one knew it was me that did it. So I just got to like go about my life. But I think knowing things like that, I don't really like things that are too public facing, because it's so different from the world I live in. But also, like, I don't get endless opportunities, you know, because people know I'm quite specific about what I do, and I haven't often compromised. So there's probably not a lot of brands I could work with or whatever, and there's not a lot of places I could show. And I think for me, everything has the same value. Like some of the most important shows in my life were in Ireland, and one was Sinead Rice got me involved with doing my first like solo show and residency at the National Gallery in Dublin, and just trusting me to like deliver something. And it was in conversation with Giacometti, who was having his first solo show, I think, in Ireland, and then Mary Conlon, who's an incredible curator and has given me kind of amazing opportunities to show the kind of breadth of work that I want to show once in Ormston House in Limerick, and just this summer at the Dock in Carrick-on-Shannon, and to really like have research periods to think about this work properly. And I think they're, just because it's not like the Met or the MoMA, like they're still amazing institutions and there's still people giving amazing risks. And those shows have actually felt more important to me because they're so genuine and so sincere, and you're being given such space to experiment that doesn't often happen when you're not like 20 in art school, you know. And like it feels so refreshing for someone to like trust you and to just allow the work to take whatever form it's going to take and trust that you'll deliver. So it's all of these people kind of pushing me along, I think, as well.
You know, I can't help myself. I'm here listening to you tell a little bit about your stories and all the accolades and accomplishment and your experiences. But when you talked about Tom, which I believe is your boyfriend, correct?
Yeah.
Your voice softened a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell me a little bit, how did you meet and how was the experience back then?
How was the experience when we met? I don't think I'd be remotely where I am without Tom. And we met because I finished school quite young. So I did a course after that in art, and a school from Wales came and gave us like a presentation. This was in Waterford in Ireland. It was like a FETAC level 5 art and design course, it was called, where you did a bit of everything. Anne O'Regan was my amazing tutor there. And this school from Wales did a presentation. They were doing like iron pouring, all this stuff. They also had a fashion course. It felt quite like fun and experimental. It was free. I decided to go to Wales to do that. Absolutely hated it. Not absolutely hated, but like it wasn't like, no one was pushing me. Like I was doing well, and I was very studious and like working very hard. I actually worked in Wetherspoons at the time as well. And then I applied to St. Martin's and didn't get in. I think because I had work that I wasn't finding fulfilling, or maybe it was just crap also. That's also
it's an option.
Yeah, that's also probably the truth. And then I went back for the second year knowing that I was going to reapply to St. Martin's, and like was very focused on that. And then my housemate was doing the foundation course when I was on the BA, and their desk was next to Tom. And as soon as I saw Tom, I was quite obsessed with making her kind of introduce us in some kind of natural way. And I think now I know it was kind of the same for Tom, but we're both quite like kind of shy people, I think, and we don't really know like how to. It's quite awkward. I'd say we're quite awkward. And Tom came to my house party, and it was a Rocky Horror Picture Show party with loads of people there, and I was actually dressed as one of the characters or something. So I don't know if that was off-putting or interesting. And then we very quickly became a couple and have been a couple since, basically, on and off. But it's been quite a long period of time. That was when I was 19. Tom was 18. So that's a long time ago. That's 14 years, 15 years next year. And Tom's like also very, I think we both try and retain like so much sensitivity in the work that we make that sometimes only the other person can understand it, you know. And we don't talk about our work together all the time, but like it's there in our person, you know, it's kind of always there. So, and our families are really intertwined and stuff now. So it's quite amazing. how it all happened, and it hasn't really shifted since. We have the same like friend group as then as we do now, so that makes it very easy to feel like you have a grounding, even though I'm always somewhere else working.
Yeah. Also another person you referred earlier that I noticed there's definitely a deep connection is your grandmother. Was she able to? Was she with us by the time you started, accomplishing great things and being able to be recognized as an artist?
Yeah, she was there, like especially through like St. Martin's and all the fashion-y stuff, because that spiraled quite quickly. She was there for the shows and the exhibitions. And the first kind of exhibition space in London, I made these kind of things you could wear and clip on in different ways. Quite like suspended things that I like, kind of free form with no kind of definition to them. And then I had these 3 vitrines that had information about how things were made. And my grandmother, I interviewed 3 women who were very close to me for each of those vitrines. One was Farshid Mustafi, who's an amazing architect. Sinead Burke has been my friend for ages and is a fantastic writer and disability rights advocate. And I just love her because she's gas and has always been so warm to me. And then my grandmother, who's like the warmest person in the world. And just thinking of those different perspectives about like the built environment, the body as a place to kind of make clothes, and it's all of those things are political. And then someone like my grandmother, who's been had been making all her life, mending, making, sewing, painting, and then like didn't really ever get to show them. So I showed some of her work, her drawings alongside my drawings in the vitrine. And then funnily enough, when my grandmother died, I had just seen her and then I had to fly to San Francisco, and she died when I was on the plane. So I didn't really get to go back and do the funeral, because funerals happen like that in Ireland. They're like, you're dead and you're in the ground kind of thing.
Less than 24 hours, you're under the ground.
The church is booked, yeah. So that was very strange for me, but also then after she died, randomly, I was asked to do a project with Eileen Gray's house in the south of France. And Eileen Gray is the artist and architect that my grandmother has always been telling me about. And that is not something that I sought out. That just came at a dinner for one of Tom's shows. A woman called Kathy Jean Grande, also amazing. She asked me to work with the house and make something happen. And I was like, that's very spooky and very witchy, because only my grandmother could have done that to make this land in my path. And it was just like, she died. There was this window where the house was being completely restored. It was, from what I could tell, it was the only time we'd be able to show work in the house before it became the property of France, like the state of France. So it was an amazing timing. And I kind of had to do that through lockdown, bring together these amazing artists and designers who, I don't know, whose work kind of like has this really singular language. And I brought my grandmother's work. She painted stones for people. Like she would paint it in the shape of a ladybird, or I had a boxer because I had a boxer dog, and pigs, things like this. And they came and traveled as well. And it was really important for me to make this connection between people who are not, formally educated or whatever, who are still making art. And for me to be showing in that house with people whose work I completely admire, and my grandmother's work there was like this enormously overwhelming thing, but also like just felt weirdly correct. Like that had to happen in that way. And I had no say over it. And it was really very hard work to pull it together, but it was everything about it just felt very right to me. And there's these feelings that I have sometimes that I just think there's nothing, it had to happen this way. Like with Tom. Like if I'd got into St. Martin's the first year, I wouldn't have met Tom. So it's like there's these things, and I haven't ever really planned anything. Like nothing's been it's nothing. I haven't I'm not one of those people that like goes to private views and exhibitions trying to like schmooze people or meet people. I'm either here working or I'm at home looking at videos of dogs with Tom, probably. That's about the limit of what reading a book maybe, but that's it really.
You kind of answered my next question, but do you believe in destiny?
Yeah. I think so. I think it's like, I don't know if it's like destiny as this one amazing thing that happens to you, but I think that there's some kind of a path that you're in the middle of treading, but you just have no fucking idea where it's going to go. But when you're in the middle of it, you can't see it. And then when you're 10 years into it, like I am, you can kind of see this is where it's what you're supposed to be doing. And it's sometimes, I feel like it's like other people or people who have passed or people who you're in conversation with are pulling strings somewhere to make these opportunities for you or to find the correct opportunities. Because there's also, like, I'm interested in that thing where you like feel like you just have to say no to something. I'm really interested in where that feeling comes from, because it's not logical. Like, and for me, it was when I first graduated, I had like amazing job offers from companies in Paris to go back to one, and two other ones were like, and I was just like, no, like it's so not the world I want to be in. And then when I was into the fashion thing that I was doing, showing like quite formally, again, the conversation of like, would you take this role at a house? Would you take this directorship at a house? Whatever. And it was just like, I really can't. Something about it was like, I can't. And if I had taken that, I wouldn't have had these amazing, not just opportunities generally, but like opportunities for learning and expanding what my practice is, whatever it is. Yeah. And I think I always have this very strong feeling that like no one's really an expert or should be taken that seriously until they're like 80 or 90 or have like lived a life, you know, and like can then say it, oh, I've done all these things. And like, I think that pressure to define as one thing or to categorize yourself is like my careers or whatever it is, vocation is usually down to trying to reject that, you know, to try and like, a lot of it is like, a lot of the things that have happened have come from saying no to other things. So it's like, but yeah, it doesn't feel like I have that much say in it.
You make space. Yeah, you make space by saying no. You make space for those opportunities to present themselves in front of you. Perhaps, who knows, right? But you said something that was interesting as well. You said you don't really make plans. A lot of those things were really plain, were just opportunities that came up to you. Yeah. But if you look ahead, do you have, I don't want to say goals specifically, but are there places and things that you want to do for the next 10 years as you see yourself as with creative endeavors or even personally?
Yes. My main goal is to get a dog. And I have been anyone who's close to me is exhausted from how exhausted I have been with the options and like, how do we adopt a dog? Do we get a puppy? It takes up so much of my life. So, and because I've had to travel, I've been in Ireland or I've been in London or I've been in France or I've been in America for projects. I don't want to get a dog unless I'm like all in and it's all I do. So I think that's my number one objective. And when I come back from the States next year, that's my main thing. And that's kind of what I would say my main goal is in my life, is to get this dog.
This is so funny.
Like, you can't play, like, I don't know, you can't plan what happens in the studio, really. There is like, there's things that I found rewarding that I would like to do again. Like when we did the Mulberry collaboration thing, although it was quite fashiony, I loved the team and the making of that. I thought that was really fun. So I would like to do a collaboration thing that's somewhere between that and like the Eileen Gray project, the Making a Momentum thing. And I would like, as part of Making a Momentum, that show, we had an artist prize. So we were able to like auction work and make this artist prize and give younger artists some money, which I think is really important. So things like that I found really rewarding. And other than that, I'm just trying to be in the studio making work and like trusting myself to make things that are very intuitive and not get bogged down by what is the the beast of the commercial art world or the beast of the commercial fashion world. Like I managed to avoid the commercial fashion world very well. And I think I'm managing the same with art. And I think it's going to be a real treat if I can get through this whole life without having to, like, I don't know, really compromise and make something for someone else's like commerce or happiness, or really compromise. Like I don't have aspirations to be very, very wealthy. So that helps me. Just like it's such a luxury to me from where I started to get to have this studio space and make work in it every day and that be my actual job. Like that's very surprising still. And I think the younger version of myself would be like, what the fuck? Like, how did that happen? You know? and I think there's when I can't get something done in the studio, I do sometimes think about that. Like it's quite mad and quite different. So just to like be grateful and like understand that it's such an enormous luxury to get to do that for your job. And the luxury isn't in like the cash that comes from it. The luxury is in the time that you get to spend with an object or making something. Like it's so different to how we're told to operate in the world. Like we're told to consume and we're told to, you know, take jobs and make work for other people. And always the eventuality is to make money, to increase profit. Like, and this is so far from that. So I feel like I'm quite clear headed because of that. And because that is so worth protecting and worth keeping, that I like can't compromise at this point, you know?
Bravo. Richard, before I let you go, 3 questions I ask everybody on the show. I want you to recommend us a few things, okay? Recommend us a book, something to read. It can be one of your favorites or something that you read recently. Doesn't really matter. Something to watch, movie, TV, documentary. It's up to you. And our next guest, who do you think we should have here next?
Okay, book. I'm trying to think of books that I've just read. Well, one that I rely on a lot is Mary Oliver, Devotions. They're poems about nature. Nothing Ever Just Disappears by Dermot Hester I read recently, and that was amazing. Like I'm a big reader, so there's a lot of books that I read and rely on. And then one book that I think really changed my perspective on writing was Journey to the Moon by Cyrano de Bergerac. And it's about a person who manages to make it to another planet where everything is flipped. So absolutely everything is questioned. Like things like a human walks only because a baby has learned how to walk. Otherwise we would always walk on all fours. Like things like this that I'm just like, what? Like that story. So that book was amazing. What was the next question? To watch.
Something to watch, yes.
To watch. What do I watch? I was working on some performances in the summer for an exhibition, and I was working with a group of kind of queer dancers, and we had a lot of amazing conversations about like this like language of queerness that's not really spoken about, and things that we know as like iconic that other people might not recognize. And they were characters like Audrey in The Little Shop of Horrors. So I got to watch that then, and the way Liza Minnelli like moves her knees in Cabaret, or Barbara Streisand in Funny Girl, how her like these gestures that she uses with her hands. So those movies I've been watching, and I think they're just so immaculate. If you can watch them, you'll be very pleased. Yeah. And then what was the last one? Next guest.
Yes.
Oh God. Who would I love to hear? Do you know, I just missed a talk last night by Joan Jonas. That was in the Irish Museum of Modern Art, I think. And I would love either Joan Jonas, let me think. Joan Jonas, Mary Oliver. Oh my God. Can they be alive or dead? You're not going to be.
We haven't. We got a median here with us. All right, let's try.
If you get a median and speak Eileen Gray, that would be perfect. Well, Mariah Carey. You know, yes. if you want to really reach.
All great names. Hey, might as well. If you're going to go, might as well go for it.
Go for it. Yeah, I think so.
Richard, I say this so often. One of the best things that what we've been able to do is to been able to connect with incredible people and have the chance to learn a little bit more about people that we admire from far away, and perhaps can get a little bit more of a taste of their lives and their struggles, because there's so much behind that we're not aware as well. And being able to connect with the true human being, and your clarity about what you do for your craft and things that you believe in is very inspiring. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time and sharing this with us.
Not at all. Thanks for your very thoughtful questions. So thank you for that as well.